So, welcome, Jim Thornton. And I'd like you, if you could, um, uh, tell us a little bit about your position and how uh, what the conditions are for your sharing this information today with us.
Sure. Again, my name is Jim Thornton. I am the State Environmental Permit Coordinator with the Governor's Office for Regulatory Innovation and Assistance. And my role is generally to provide advice and guidance to citizens, businesses, developers, etc., on getting state, federal, and local permits and environmental permits in the state of Washington.
Fantastic. And as far as your appearance here today with us, for which we're very grateful, yeah, I understand you're going to simply be speaking not for the department or your association with the state, but just from your personal positions and understanding.
That's correct. I am it's called an exempt employee. I work for the governor's office. Basically, the governor is my boss. But in this particular case, I'll be speaking based on my own personal experience and views. So I will not be representing the state or the governor's office.
Excellent. Very good. Very good. So without any further ado, I'll let you just share what you'd like. And
okay.
If you'd like to share the screen, share a screen, you know how to do that?
Well, first of all, I don't have anything to share on screen.
Okay.
And secondly, I'm still technology challenged. So I think I'm pretty sure I could figure it out, but no, I just kind of wanted to go over what my thoughts are and a little bit of my experience. I think you've all seen my resume. I've worked for 15 years at the Department of Ecology, and I actually did had many roles. I always caveat kind of two things when I give presentations or discussions. First of all, I have a Bachelor of Arts degree in psychology. And secondly, I'm not an attorney. So I just want to make all that clear. Yeah, I've seen I've had employees who have tried to embellish their resumes and change things or put things in. I have a master's degree, or I have one guy claiming he had a doctorate and I knew he didn't. So I always like to be very clear up front what my education is. So 15 years with the Department of Ecology. And during that time, just a couple notable things. One, I wrote the EIS for the Navy home port in Port of Everett. So I was the lead. I worked for the governor's office at that time. Was assigned to the governor's office in actually to do all the environmental permitting for the Navy home port. And in that role, I testified before Congress, the legislature, and did a lot of public speaking. And that was probably the highlight of my ecology career. And the other kind of notable thing is I worked with Christine Gregoire very closely. So because she was the Attorney General assigned to that. Another part of my career has been contaminated sediments. I became kind of the state's expert on contaminated sediments. And that led me to being on a subcommittee of the National Academy of Sciences, studying the extent and significance of contaminated sediments. So yeah, I've had a pretty varied career at ecology. I kind of lived off of federal grants. That's why ecology would get a grant and I'd get assigned to do whatever the grant was for. Then I went into consulting, and from my very first project was energy related. So I did the permitting for a gas-fired power plant up at Cherry Point. And then they had to have a pipeline. So then I permitted the pipeline. And that started me on a long career of permitting what I call energy infrastructure projects. So it started out with gas-fired power plants and then transmission lines, lots of natural gas, a large one, 670-mile, 46-inch big pipe from Wyoming to Oregon. I did all the FERC resource reports and led a team of about 45 people. I was the project manager. And the only notable thing I can say about that is I did not get a divorce because of it. Came close, but I didn't. And then over the last 10 or 15 years, I've been very involved in permitting a renewable energy, primarily wind and solar. I think it's fair to say I'm probably have permitted close to, if not the most, renewable energy projects in the state of Washington, over 2,000 megawatts of wind and solar. And so I've really been involved in the permitting, but more than that, kind of the whole process of developing a project, what it takes, and all of the roadblocks, hurdles, whatever you want to call it, to get a renewable energy actually on the ground, built and producing energy. I've worked all around the United States, from Massachusetts to Florida to Mexico and British Columbia. And so a lot of experience nationwide. Now, most of my renewable energy project has been West Coast, and that's from British Columbia to Mexico and almost all the Western states. And from small projects, again, because of the quirkiness of our federal laws, 5-megawatt projects, solar, are very popular, all the way up to 450-megawatt solar projects. And the largest wind project in the state of Washington, which when permitted was 1,600 megawatts in Garfield County. So that's a kind of a summary of my experience. So now the conference that you're talking about, I think it's important to understand kind of the whole development process. What goes into when a developer comes to the state of Washington and they want to site a renewable energy project? How do they decide where to go? How do they decide what land they need to build their project on? And all the different phases of going through that, everything from a lease from the local landowner, getting in the queue with BPA for transmission. Do you have enough transmission? And then how do you get what they call an offtake agreement? So you're going to build a 400 megawatt project, which is going to cost tens of millions, if not more. You're not going to build it unless you have someone to buy your energy. So then you have to go through that process. Now, I will say that some projects are built at risk or spec. I mean, they are at risk. They spend their own personal money to site a project and get it permitted, and then hope that someone will come buy it. Those don't happen too often. So I've got, my feeling is it's to give you a kind of an overall process and then narrow down on the permitting. And that's my thought. Now, I have another idea for you, though. What would you think of having a panel discussion where I could bring in two of the people that I know that I've worked with? One is Dave Tomlinson. He is a project developer. He's developed projects all over the Western United States. He knows very intimately that process. He actually lives in Bellevue. Oh. And he has also worked for a battery company. These almost all projects today include some kind of battery storage. And then a third person that I would recommend on the panel is a guy by the name of Brian Trent. He is in Seattle. but he works for um, a solar company, a solar panel company. In fact, they're one of the largest solar panel companies in the United States, with two large factories. And so he's um, very knowledgeable on on solar projects. Now that doesn't cover obviously wind, hydrogen, or pump storage, all of those, which I also have experience with. But Brian would certainly know all about solar and solar panels, design, engineering, what goes into it. In fact, I've been working with Brian on a 450 megawatt solar project in Garfield County that they just submitted their permits for. So that's another approach, is to have a panel discussion of the three of us. I've contacted both Brian and Dave, and it's kind of pending. They're looking at their schedules, so there's no commitment. And I told them that I hadn't talked to you yet, so there was no commitment on that side either. But that was just another thought, is having a panel discussion.
That's a great idea. Yeah, let's develop that. Just to frame this for you also, though I'm sure Jim Bloss has done that. We're really CCL. It has. Are you familiar with CCL, Citizens Climate Lobby?
Only what I read on the internet. Obviously, I looked it up and read all the news. I actually watched a couple of videos, training videos.
Right. Well, the organization has got fantastic values, and their focus is, of course, the climate and mitigation of climate change. We've got 4 agenda items that just recently we've expanded from the one that we've been focused on for years and years, carbon fee and dividend. And I don't know if you're familiar with that, but putting a price on bringing fossil fuel out of the ground and then providing a dividend to the citizens for that increase, right, for that sort of taxation of the primary source. But we've expanded to electrification, healthy forests, and permitting reform. And I think that permitting reform is just so insightful. And I would think that I would like to hear your opinion on that. But all of us, all 4 of us from this side on CCL, have a sense that there's an awful lot of energy just waiting to be permitted. And with the retirement of coal-fired plants, et cetera, and so forth, that it's going to be a challenge to get permit reform going to the rate necessary to compensate for the additional electrification and retirement of fossil fuel plants across the nation, and especially in Washington State, or I should say, including Washington State. We have a sense of urgency about that. And so we're looking for a way not only to educate ourselves so that we're making the right decisions on what to do, but specifically that, what can we do? How can we help? We're a great organization for mobilizing people, for helping,
right,
for listening. And so that's what we're looking for. Ultimately, if we can, with you, is not only to be educated as you're graciously agreeing to do, but also to help us to tailor what we can do. We can write letters to the editor, we can do other things like that, but we really want to move the needle on this. Jim Bloss, please help me out here.
I'll give you a 30-second thumbnail here, Jim. The point is, time is of the essence. We're all going to die. I mean, basically, if something isn't done now. And permitting reform looks like it's the long pole in the tent. I mean, it could be transmission lines, I don't know, but at this point in time, what we're trying to do is get a feel for what we can do. You know, lobbying, talking to legislators, congressional people and so on, to help them, put them in a position to say, we can't wait till 2030 or 2050 and all of that. We got to do this stuff now. So how can we, how can the permitting process be, you know, compressed or changed or whatever without, you know, messing up the environment, EIS and all of that? But how, isn't there ways to make it quicker? And that's the bottom line. That's where we're coming from. So
Right.
that's it. That's it.
Well, my perspective on that is a little different than yours. So right now at Bonneville Power Administration, there's 30,000 megawatts of renewable energy projects in what they call their queue. So,
Right.
So when you get, when a developer gets to a point where they have a site and they want to get their power from that location to whomever's going to use it, they sign up and pay a lot of money to get in a queue at Bonneville Power Administration. So it's that process itself that takes some time, and what holds up the queue is lack of transmission. So there are two couple of big issues there. One, that 30,000 megawatts, some of that is just a lot of pipe dreams. Somebody had some money, they paid for a line in the queue, and they worked through project by project. And a lot of those projects are going to die from natural causes. They aren't going to happen. So if FERC just a week ago has changed the rules on how that queue is going to work. So I don't want to digress into that too much, but that should free up some of that queue. But the problem is still transmission. So there's just not enough transmission capacity to get all the energy we needed to where we need it. So when a developer, first thing they have to do is determine, and they go to whatever transmission, whomever owns the transmission, whether it's Bonneville, Puget Sound Energy, whatever. And the first thing they try to do is to figure out where they can interconnect. And that's a whole study. And then they have to do another study on how it affects the whole transmission system from the point of where they interconnect to where it's going to be delivered. And that may require additional study and even additional investment. And one of the first things you find out is that you may have a 400 megawatt project, but you can't get your 400 megawatts to wherever you want 100% of the time. It may only be 70% of the time or 50% of the time or even less than that, because there's just not capacity all the time to get your power there. So that's a big dance with the power transmission owned company. So that's one of the big roadblocks is transmission. And that's a whole nother issue I'm working on. And that's one where I feel a lot needs to be done. Now, on the permitting side, what you mentioned, Jim, there are really two pathways to getting your project permitted.
You're going to talk about, you're talking about the local versus. I thought that was fascinating. The difference, yes. The difference of trying to do it just locally and within a jurisdiction, and the incredible less amount of time it takes if you do it that way. I mean, that's.
Yeah, it really depends, Jim. This is where it is so difficult. And I can give you a couple examples. So there are really two ways you can get a permit, renewable energy permit in the state of Washington. One is through the local authority. You go through the county and all the land use regulations, and usually it's a conditional use permit, and that can take, as I mentioned to you, Jim, before, 9 months. I mean, it's not all that long, 9 months, maybe a year. What that doesn't count is upfront studies. I mean, for a wind project, you have to do 2 years of avian study before you can even get to the permitting. So there's all these upfront studies that have to be done, archaeology. And in a meeting that we had the other day, and as I mentioned, these developers oftentimes, they're spending their own money up to this point. For let's take it a 1,000-acre wind project or solar project, the archaeology surveys will cost around $100,000. Your habitat, vegetation, wetlands will cost you another 75,000. You know, before you know it, you're 200,000 or more into it. So it's all these upfront studies before you even get to the permitting that take time and money. So you have your local permitting, and then you have EFSEC, the Energy Facility Site Evaluation Council, which you can opt into. Well, that usually I recommend to a client not to go that route because it's takes a lot of time and takes a lot more money. And if you are permitted through the Energy Facility Siting Council, you are regulated by them for the rest of the project's life. And you pay a monthly fee or fees into EFSEC to be regulated. So it's something you don't go into lightly. And then EFSEC, it was its original legislation was to regulate nuclear power plants, the siting and the construction and long-term maintenance and operation of nuclear power plants. And many of EFSEC's regulations, as what you're familiar with now, Jim, going through this adjudication process, which is, I just read more of it today, is all because of they're regulated like a nuclear power plant. So those are the two kind of permitting pathways. It's not a pathway, but the state legislature this last year gave ecology the authority to do what they call multi-agency permitting. So ecology can coordinate the permits among all the different agencies and make sure they set up timelines to get it done, etc. But that doesn't affect EFSEC. EFSEC is still its own. So we're only talking then about local projects where ecology then can let's say, manage that permitting process. This is what some of the things I'd be talking about, but I'm not convinced that that's going to work because they loaded it up with a lot of other requirements. So you just don't go to ecology and say, we want you to lead this multi-agency. You have to submit a permit or an application. And that application looks like a permit application. You have to put all this information there. And then you have to agree to a certain length of time where you're going to consult with all the tribes. Now, yes, tribes should be consulted with, absolutely. But many people, tribes are understaffed. Your schedule is not necessarily their schedule. And so consultation with the tribes can take a long time. And that's a required part of going through this, quote, ecology coordinated permitting process. So I'm not convinced that that's actually going to expedite anything. And honestly, on the projects I work on, we do everything we can to avoid a state permit. So what are you managing? You try to avoid every permit you can in, whether it's federal or state. You almost always have the local conditional use permit, but you're going to try to do everything you can to avoid those other permit requirements. There's a couple that you can't avoid on the state level, and those are like a stormwater permit. But that's, I would call pretty much pro forma. I mean, you qualify for a statewide permit, and it's a stamp by an engineer that you're doing all the things that are required under the statewide permit. So, so what can you do to expedite that process? Well, some of the things I think about is you have to fill out a SEPA checklist with your permit application. The SEPA checklist is the same SEPA checklist that was promulgated into law, I think, in 1973. Hasn't changed since 73. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes.
Could I ask, is that CEPA?
Yes.
What is it?
And what does that stand for?
State Environmental Policy Act.
Okay, SEPA.
S.
Okay. State,
SEPA.
yes,
SEPA.
not C.
Yeah.
SEPA. Okay.
It's the equivalent of the federal NEPA.
Right.
Oh, okay, okay. National, yeah, environmental policy. Yeah,
Yes. So,
okay.
so one of the things that I don't see ever them changing SEPA, but you could certainly draft an addendum that could be attached to the SEPA to address wind projects, solar projects, which answers all the questions specific to a wind project or a solar project. That would give the local agency kind of all the information. And the other thing it would be uniform. What happens now is every county will have a little different regulation of renewable energy projects. Getting back to your question once again, Jim, about FSEC. Well, Yakima County, there were two big solar projects being proposed. Yakima County had no regulations related to permitting of solar projects. So what did they do? They said, we don't want you, go to FSEC. Yeah. So
Go to FSEC.
FSEC, yeah, the Energy Facility Siting Evaluation Council, and then wait 2 years to get your permit.
I'm sorry, it just sounds like a curse. Go to FSEC.
Go to FSEC. Yeah. Now, to be fair to FSEC, they have been trying to expedite their process, and they're doing much better than they used to. They really are. They are really doing much. But if you have any opposition and you have to go into what they call the adjudicated process, then that's when it gets drug out for a long time. It's a very legal proceeding with all the trappings of a legal proceeding. So, I think there could be model ordinances. So every county could adopt an ordinance for permitting of renewable energy projects. The state can't require them to adopt a model ordinance, but at least they'd have a blueprint, a model that they could use, that they could then, and one of the big issues, especially many of these projects, most of these projects are in Eastern Washington, is the loss of agricultural land. So you take a county like Yakima County. No, it wasn't Yakima. It was Kittitas County. They were holding up some solar projects, and they decided to pass an ordinance. And I actually testified before the county commissioners on that ordinance. But I thought they did a good thing. They took the state agricultural classification, and the highest classified ag land, they said you can't build solar projects there. We don't want to lose any more ag. You can't build there. But all the other land, go for it. And here's the regulation you have to comply with. So that was good. Another county, Klickitat County, passed what they call an energy overlay zone. So they took the lower half of Klickitat County and came up with basically a zoning ordinance overlaying so you could build renewable energy projects in that overlay zone. And they actually did an EIS on that. So it was a little faster to get through their permitting process. those are some of my ideas, that could be implemented to help expedite. Yes, Skip.
Well, I'll let Mark go first.
Sure.
Mark, you had your hand up as well. Go ahead, Mark.
I appreciate that. It's what you're describing, although I don't think you can really say this and keep your job, is we've got a pretty dysfunctional system. And if in fact we've got a dysfunctional system, we ought to take a look at top down and figure out what would be functional. I'm aware that in New York, they've gone through that kind of a process, and they've developed a model that appears to work pretty well in their Office for Renewable Energy siting. Now, I don't know, there may be huge problems with that too, but I wonder if there's any motivation either at an administrative level or at a legislative level to scrap what's not working, continue what is working, and develop a system that is going to work well. And by the way, we're as concerned about transmission lines as we are about the permit process, because we understand that getting the permits for creating the transmission lines is also a problem. It doesn't look like BPA is doing an awful lot to build the lines that we need to get, well, the lines that we need.
Not to mention not having enough copper.
Right. Yeah. Right. Well,
Yeah,
Mark, you're yes, that's I really like what you said. I mean, that is, and that's something I've given a lot of thought to. I started with the state, restarted with the state. I mean, I had this 30-year absence and then came back and started in February. And it's taken me about 5 months, 6 months to realize we have a broken system. We have a broken system in this state. And it's not because we haven't been trying to do things or do things well. We have. We're probably one of the most progressive states in the nation to address climate change.
Yep.
But we have, and I've already started right then. And you're right. I don't think I'd lose my job, but I'd certainly, they may shut me up for a while. We need a Department of Energy and Climate. We do not have one agency that's responsible for implementing all these laws we've passed. And I've actually started writing a paper on what needs to be done. The legislature, in their wisdom, wants to appease everybody. So they've given some responsibility to ecology. They've given some responsibility to Department of Commerce. They've given some responsibility to Department of Transportation. They've given some responsibility to the Utilities and Transportation Commission. We've passed, I would say probably close to, if you over time, billions of dollars on all these different programs, either being spent or to be spent. And there's no one agency accountable for all that money.
Did you say billions with a B?
I think yes. I think over time, I'm not saying we have, but I think if you look at the total of what's being spent, it's going to, well, I'll start off with saying hundreds of millions. I shouldn't say anything because I don't know the exact amount, but it's definitely
okay. Hundreds of millions sounds safer, but yeah, it's not a small amount.
It's not
and
a small
there's no
amount.
One agency.
And the other thing, there's a lot of federal money. So if you look on the federal money that's available out there for doing a lot of this infrastructure building, we are talking about potentially billions. But anyway, my whole point is, we don't have one agency that's responsible for energy and climate. As you know, and everybody's complaining about, quote, the increase in the gasoline tax. Well, there was no increase in the gasoline tax. There was a tax on carbon. And the refineries have to pay that tax. So the refineries are just passing on those costs to us, the consumers. That money, which is probably a good thing, and we want to reduce carbon, that money's going back to, guess what? The general fund.
General fund, yeah.
With a, quote, commitment that they're going to spend it on renewable energy or climate programs.
Right.
They lie.
It should be going back to an agency which has a mission on energy and climate to help directly fund these things. No, no bypass through the legislature. So, again, I can come up with so many examples. It is just amazing when I start going through the regulations and the different councils we have. Give you an example. This last legislative session, I told you about this.
Jim,
Yeah.
I'm sorry to interrupt you for a second here, but
Go
I
ahead.
fear Ellie probably has to go. She's got her hand up. If you don't mind,
No, go ahead.
I want to hear every word that you have to say, and I am very desirous of bringing you back, but I want to honor the folks that might have to leave.
Sure.
Also.
Yeah. Ellie?
Ellie.
Yeah,
Thank
I
you, Jim.
do have to go very soon. We're after the top of the hour. And yeah, I want to hear every word. So I'm so glad you recorded this, Nate, Skip. And I think FERC is the one responsible for permitting transmission lines. And I don't think they have the same power that they do over, like, if they had to permit a gas pipeline. But there may be some ins and outs that I don't understand about that. So I'd love to hear you talk about what are the roadblocks for getting more transmission lines. If you feel that that's the most significant roadblock for the energy projects, is that they don't have the transmission lines, then what's the biggest roadblock for the transmission lines? And Jim may know more about this as well.
No, I just want to say and add to that is, I think Jim T, we're going to have to start using last. Well, I mean, we have a Jim C also, who's part of our activities.
Dr. Conca, yeah.
Dr. Conca, but Jim's thought to have 3 folks who deal in all of this as a panel for the state get together, I think is where some of the things that he is sort of surmising and what have you, I bet those other 2 guys would have input to a lot of the things that he's saying and actually be able to clarify and maybe even support a lot of the things that Jim is saying. So I'm recommending that to you, Ellie, is that's one thing as far as a presentation. The other is, although there's no agency coordinating all of these efforts in Washington State, well, there's nothing at the national level either. That doesn't help, right? You've got in the governor's office, you've got 2 people. One of them is taking care of energy, and the other one is taking care of the environment as policy advisors. That's the only point in the whole state that I can see where it comes together. Those 2 broad policy areas right under the governor.
Yes.
Would you say that that's about it?
Yes. And the other thing to keep in mind is they are policy. They have no,
That's right.
No kind of regulatory or decision-making role, just policy advice.
I think those 2 young ladies have a big job, and I don't think they're in a position to be able to even recommend to the governor what you're talking about. Okay. I don't think they have a big enough picture in what they do. They're sort of gather up information and then maybe turn it into policy.
Okay.
They don't.
Let me interrupt here. Ellie,
I'm done.
She's got to go. We'll meet again next Monday at 5. Ellie, if you can join us. And Jim, Jim T, do you think you can join us next Monday at 5?
Sure.
Okay,
that'd be
fantastic.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Okay.
And I will listen to every word of the recording. This is fantastic. It's just what we need to know is where we can put our energy to get the most bang for our buck.
Right. And Ellie, I can definitely address your question about transmission and FERC and state and et cetera.
Great. I will listen to the recording. Thanks.
I'll post this on the same share. Okay, she's gone. All right, Jim Bloss, sorry to interrupt you.
Fine.
Just wanted to make sure, since we are at the top of the hour, I didn't, I honored Ellie's commitments. Does anybody else have to leave right away? Or do we want to sort of clean up what we're talking about now and talk a little bit about the next session? Does that
I've
sound
got about
okay?
15.
Maybe
I've
by,
got about 15.
okay,
I'm
so
guessing to let Jim sort of summarize in his head Jim T.
Yeah.
Summarize in his head where he thinks we are as far as his ability to help us get to where we want to go, and then maybe start thinking about next week and what might be the next things to talk about, that might fit in with the flow that we're trying to create here. I think we got
Yeah,
Ellie
yeah.
convinced about the 3 people for a panel, though, Jim. I think you said that's a good idea.
Yeah, I agree. It's a good idea. We've got to figure out when and how that would fit in. And
Mark's got his hand.
I had my hand up quite a while ago, and I let Mark talk, and then I let Ellie talk, and
I
so
interrupted.
I'd still, and then well, Jim, you had some stuff to add as well, but your idea of I think a checklist, Jim Thornton, I think a checklist that everybody can work from, a central department, if not at least a government. Are you familiar with the term Tiger Team?
Yes.
I was thinking that your checklist, in other words, for the types of projects for certifying, I was thinking that it would potentially be helpful as an interim before we fix everything, which we may never get to. I think there's got to be some patches to help get things going that need to get going right now, because the big fixes take a lot of people agreeing, and it generally takes a crisis to get a lot of people to agree, and I'd rather not wait for the crisis. But little thoughts like patches like this, like your idea of a model for people to use, just getting it out there and getting the word out there for everybody, and we can help with that kind of thing. And then potentially a Tiger Team that can help these people not just to look at the model, but to understand the various aspects that are important. So along with the model, there is this advice that the Tiger Team can go in and say, okay, you're thinking about a project, here's the stuff to look at, and here's what's important, and you can check in with us when you hit roadblocks. So we're not official, but you can you can certainly use us as a resource. And I think there's this thirst out there for the resource to help them go through this stuff. But anyway, that was my thought. That was just a top level thought. I had to get it out of my system before I lost it, and hopefully we can talk about something like that. I want to hear. I mean, I would think that you're just chock-a-block full of ideas for both the long-term fix and the patches that are necessary right now. So anyway, I'll let you continue.
Well, Mark has got something that he has to get off his chest.
Oh, yeah.
Otherwise he's going to forget.
That's right. That's right. Mark, thank you for your patience.
I'm not going to forget. I like the idea of the patches. I like the idea of looking at long-term solutions. I would guess that between you and your 2 buddies, you guys may have already kind of a model for the kind of energy permitting that you'd like to be able to see happen in the state. I wonder if those ideas could somehow be melded with the ideas that are coming out of New York and perhaps California. I mean, is there a way that we can build a long-term sustainable process for getting it right? Skip is talking about we don't want to wait for a crisis. Hell, I think we're in a crisis. And I think
Yeah.
transmission lines are huge. I mean, it scares the shit out of me when I saw on Bonneville Power that we're going to have brownouts because they're not going to be able to have enough energy next year.
Yeah.
That's just
You're
That's
right. You're right, Mark.
those brownouts, if I can say, we're recognizing we're in a crisis, but we're actually looking around the corner. The brownouts where people die and the ocean suddenly rising 2 feet, those are the kind of crises I'm thinking that are really going to motivate everybody. They're going to be running around like chickens with their head cut off. And we should have in place, I'm hoping, through Jim Thornton's ideas and those fellows that he respects, that we have in place some concepts that when they're running around with their heads cut off, and you say, "Here, do this now."
Yeah.
And both the patches and long-term fix are helpful in that. Sorry, I had to get that thought out too. Sorry.
Yeah, well, no, as you know, Skip, when you have a crisis, it's too late. You know,
Right.
your chance to stop it, fix it, whatever, it's too late. I mean, when you have your crisis, now you're in crisis mode, and it's survival mode. I mean, that's what it is. And so, we can all see these things coming, and because of our short-sightedness, and you're really right. I mean, one thing I didn't tell you about I was really involved with the Presbyterian Church, and I was appointed to a national committee on the Presbyterian Church to write their first mission statement. And in 1987-88, I sat in on numerous meetings about what we had then, in those days, called global warming. Now it's called climate change. And I sat in on many meetings in back east, Washington, D.C., as a representative from the Presbyterian Church. And when we wrote our mission statement and report in 1988, one of the great perils to the earth was climate change. I mean, water was another one, but that was in the 80s. I mean, and here's another thought. I love telling this story. So I'm at a conference in Washington, D.C. at Howard University, and it was on climate change, global warming. And I'm sitting at this table with like 5 other men. The other men were all dressed in suits, coats, and ties. And at the break, I was curious. I said, "Well, who are you guys here with?" "I'm with the Presbyterian Church, but who are you representing?" And they said, "The company." Well, I should have known that because I was in Army intelligence, but I said, "Who's the company?" "The CIA." They were studying climate change in Africa because in the 80s, they were very concerned about the geopolitical changes that climate change was going to cause in Africa. Well, the chickens are coming home to roost now, aren't they?
Yeah, they are.
And what happened to their report? What happened to their work? That was 87-88, So, yeah. Anyway, you got me off track now on the crisis.
No. That's some delightful information, Jim. That is some delightful background. I mean, horrific, but it's so telling of how we got here. There were a lot of smart people that saw it way before us, but it wasn't, the great. It didn't find a political path to the public.
Well, and right after that, and I've been reading on this too, I find my references, but the big propaganda machine started cranking out anti-climate information. Finally people figured out someone's going to lose. It was going to be the oil and gas companies and some of the other companies, and they started, the counter to all that. And so we got bombarded with that, and it just kind of went away. But I want to get back to transmission, because I think that is the big issue is transmission. We can work on the permitting, and there's definitely some things we can do about expediting that. And I have a little bit more on that. But on transmission, I have no faith that Puget Sound Energy or the other, or the PUDs, they're very conservative, first of all. They have to they have to have a guarantee of revenue, like Puget Sound Energy. So they're risk adverse. They're not willing to go out and build stuff at risk. And then we have a Utilities and Transportation Commission that says, no, you can't do that because it's going to cost our consumers money. And we have to hold the cost down as much as we can. So here's another idea that I'd like to float out there. Let's form the Washington Transmission Corporation. Let's form a state corporation. There are other examples in the United States and Canada. We could even do a joint partnership with a commercial company. I've worked with the largest transmission provider in Europe. They're starting an office here in the US and they want to invest in transmission in the United States. And there are other ones. They're not the only one. His name is Terna. You can look that up on the internet, Terna. They are the Italian system operator, and they're the largest private developer in Europe. And Terna wants to spend big dollars in the United States in building transmission. So why not explore the idea of forming a state transmission corporation? I know you mentioned New York, LIPA, Long Island, Long Island Power Authority. It's a state corporation, and they provide transmission. In Canada, we have BC Hydro just across the border. BC Hydro operates the transmission system, and it's government ran. So I've been talking with two other nonprofit organizations. What's the Ray? It's named after a man who was a billionaire and then gave his money to environmental causes, who wants to look at building solar arrays along highway right-of-ways, primarily interstate.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, Germany does
yeah.
that.
Yeah, and then there's a sister organization called New Generation Highways. They want to build high voltage DC transmission lines along the interstate system nationally to interconnect all the states using the right of ways on the interstate transmission system. And you look at Washington State, we have a law that prevents us from doing that.
Really?
The fiber optics people, they got a special provision where they can build fiber optics in the right of way, but transmission, no. Well,
what was
Laws can change.
Anyway, well, let's I think there are a lot of opportunities. I love the idea of DC transmission lines up. Nationally, we could gain 27 gigawatts just by upgrading the transmission lines we've got right now. Right. I don't know what it would help in Washington State, but so it seems like we could dedicate at least an hour to talking about transmission lines.
Well, I was thinking the whole thing could take 2 days.
2 days? Okay. So two sessions?
24 hours a day.
You're talking about 48 hours? Are you what 2 days in what form?
No, I'm thinking an hour, especially if we did a panel. I could easily do an hour because you have to reserve at least 20 minutes for Q&A. There's going to be a lot of Q&A. So an hour goes by pretty fast, really.
Oh, it does too.
Look
what we've seen. We've seen that
here.
Thinking, so
this sounds like more like a seminar kind of thing, like 3 hours worth of time set aside just to do a seminar of some sort.
Yeah, we plan on doing something like that in the future.
I think so in the future, because I'd like to. My question is always, to what end? For us, the end has got to be, the education has got to result in a proposed solution. There's your puppy. So
she's this is her walk time. You see, You guys are intruding on
Yeah.
the walk time.
Well, worse
Yeah,
is
yeah,
you
yeah.
may have to go to the bathroom.
Yeah. If
Yeah.
it was
I
our
just wanted
puppy,
to
she
go-
would.
Well,
I wanted
what
to comment on what Skip said. We got to be solution oriented. We got to have to somehow focus on where we got to do, what we got to get done, how we organize this thing, and make it happen. And if that your panel can do that, boy, I'm 500% supportive of that.
Yeah, well,
Absolutely,
one of
absolutely.
the things that Jim mentioned, and I've got to do some work on this, but and that is, who are the key people? Who are the key legislators? Who are you mentioned the policy people and the governor's staff? You know, who at Commerce is the key person? Department of Commerce. Who at Ecology is? So to get you a list of these people, their roles, emails, phone numbers, etc., that you can focus on in your efforts.
I have somebody at Ecology right now, and you, Jim, were my first find. So yeah, we're working on that. I think I told these guys, I mean, my take is you get the right people in the right positions, to focus on a particular issue, and you can actually get something done.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. And,
So,
and another thing too, before we go that I want to bring, there is actually a lot going on in terms of this permitting that we're talking about, and as well as other efforts. And you all don't know about it. You know, it's
Yeah.
being done by these different agencies. And so I want to make sure that I can let you know about what is going on. And in fact, some of it is kind of urgent. I've got to look it up here in a PowerPoint, but I just found out last week at this meeting that Ecology is holding like 4 listening sessions on permitting of renewable energy projects. They're meeting with tribes, they're meeting with businesses, they're meeting with other stakeholders, and they've got these meetings scheduled out. So one of my questions to them was, well, what is the agenda? Who are you inviting to these sessions? And I kind of got, well, let's see, we'll get that to you later.
Oh God, it sounds like it's a tick mark on somebody's some manager's list. Let's meet with people.
Yeah, well, I'm certainly, I can send you, what these dates are and what these times, and I told her I want to go to those meetings. I mean, heck, I'm working for the governor's office. I should know what's going on, and I'm interfacing with the public all the time, probably more so than they are. So anyway, that's, we need to get more information out, and so what's going on and what the state is actually doing, rather than it's behind the curtain all the time.
All we can tell you is that we 3 that you're looking at right here are doing the kind of digging that you would hope that everybody would be doing. It's because we're scared shitless. I mean, from what we've learned so far, we're scared. I mean, it's not, we see or intuit, I think, a lot of the stuff that you're verifying. So I'm not sure.
It sounds like you've known about since the 80s.
Right.
Yeah, and then, but I also have my guilty side that I also did a lot of work for the oil and gas industry since then too.
This is your chance to make up for that.
Yeah. We'll vindicate you.
Yes.
So we're running out of time here. I apologize. I'm got to be the kind of
let's call
everybody here
and give Jim a break, and more importantly, his dog.
Yes.
Give his dog a break. Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Big picture,
thank you.
just floating aspects of this, just so we're all framing this properly. Like Mark said, we want to be solution oriented. In engineering, managers would absolutely not allow engineers to come in with a problem unless they had a solution. We don't need to know what the problems are without a solution. I mean, we can't do anything about problems without a solution. So ultimately, when we get done talking about this, I'd like us all to agree there may be categories of solutions: long-term, medium-term, short-term, and investigation. You know, things we got to find out from legislators, et cetera, and so forth. But that's our focus. We want to learn this stuff, but by God, we want to do something. And there is a lot I think we can offer as far as letters to the editor, getting the state and regions with the CCL group leaders and such, talking to their legislators, pushing for particular solutions. But I don't want everybody going out. I think we all, none of us, I say me, but I think all of us agree, we don't want everybody going out for a pass. We want to, with your knowledge, I think, Jim Thornton, I think we can come up with a focus that has the best likelihood of success as far as what CCL can provide. Now, maybe some people want to go off and invest in a transmission line company and such, but you know, that's not something CCL can do, but it's still some good ideas. So there's going to be a category of solutions that you're going to suggest that we can't do, but there's a category we can do. And the ones that we can do ultimately in the presentations, I'd like to get to the point when we're talking to Washington State and possibly CCL nationally, I'd like to be able to say, okay, and these were all the problems. This is where we're messed up, or there are challenges, I should say. Nobody's messed up. And here are the solutions. Let's focus on these things. So next week, what do you think? What do you think the agenda should be?
Why don't we let him
thoughts about problems?
Let him think about it a little bit.
Yeah, I'll have a chance to talk with my two colleagues about the panel discussion and kind of the organization of that. You know, tonight I didn't really know what to expect in terms of our discussion. I can certainly have my thoughts much better framed next week. You know, a little bit more focused because I have felt we have gone kind of in a lot of different directions tonight. And I think your comment, Skip, about solution oriented, you know, I think that's important to have some kind of concrete things that I could recommend, suggest that I think are viable solutions. Just an aside on that, I was a manager and, you know, managing some pretty complex things with engineers and scientists on, and they'd come to my office and they'd, like you said, have a problem. And the first thing I'd remind them is I have a degree in psychology. So you tell me what the answer is.
Well, let me give you a little insight here. And you have some simpatico circumstance here, in that Mark is a clinical psychologist.
Okay.
I think some of us know at least where you're coming from, for sure.
Okay.
Yeah. To be a little funny on that, on your story just then, Jim, I would, Jim Thornton, when the engineers would come in and you let them know that you've got a psychological degree, they'd want to sit down and talk about this problem, but just to relieve their tension, you know. You say, I didn't mean I was going to give you therapy. I mean, I want you to come in with a solution.
Right. Well,
I'm not here to listen to your problems.
Yeah,
I'm here to listen to your solutions.
Yeah, I'm not kidding about this, but at my office down here in Olympia, I actually do have a couch in my office.
Perfect.
But you're prepared. You're prepared anyway.
I'm prepared, right?
Yeah, you're
well.
prepared.
Let's
Wonderful.
just all leave together, and then we.
Yeah, I got a dog and a wife who are now kind of standing around the door.
Yeah, there you go.
Okay, yeah, Jim, this is fantastic. Thank you very much.
Okay.
For joining us. I'll send out a notification to everybody for next our next meeting on Monday at 5, and I'll let you set the agenda, Jim Thornton.
Okay, all right, thanks.
Okay,
Bye.
Fantastic.
Thanks,
Thanks, everybody.
And thank you,
Bye.
Jim.